All right, guys, let's get into it. I titled this podcast Brace for Impact because I believe that we're at a really, really important time in society, in culture in general. And I believe that things are going to get significantly worse before they get any better. My prediction is that Donald Trump will win the presidential election come November. And my secondary prediction to that is that the civil unrest that we're seeing in some of these major cities will not subside. In fact, if anything, I believe they're going to get worse because of Donald Trump's successful reelection campaign. I don't think these individuals are going to get what they want. In fact, I don't know that they even know what they want other than just being immature children, more interested and hell-bent on destruction and chaos and violence and terror than trying to affect any sort of positive change in society. So if that's the case, and we know that these individuals are more interested in chaos and disorder and confusion and fear, then I can't envision a scenario in which that would subside. I believe that if these protests, I use quotation marks, were with noble intent and noble ambitions, we would see something a little differently than what we're seeing now, which is the violence and the chaos and the murder and just the madness that we're seeing. So this isn't a podcast about rising up. It isn't a podcast about fighting against the government. That's not what I want to talk with you about. And although we might be able to have some of those conversations and talk about that, certainly from both sides of the equation, this is a podcast in making sure that you are the patriarch that your family and your community members and your employees need you to be. And a patriarch is a leader. Is the male leader of the household, of the community, of the business. It isn't a negative word. It isn't a swear word, although a lot of people would have you believe that. In fact, I believe that a patriarch's job is noble and virtuous, and your ability to step into that role is going to ultimately spell success for you and your family and the people you care about, or theirs and your ultimate demise. Now, some might say that's just hyperbole. I'm blowing this up, and maybe I am, but here's the deal. Let's say that I'm wrong. Let's say that come November, things start to settle down, everybody just retreats back to their life, and we don't see the violence and the atrocities that we're seeing in some of these major cities now. Let's say that's the case. Best case scenario. Well, if that happens, the 8 points that I'm going to lay out for you today is not going to be wasted. In fact, if things go well, you'll be in a better position if you follow the 8 steps I'm going to share with you. If things go south, you'll be in a better spot because of the 8 things I'm going to share with you today. So regardless of whether I'm right or wrong, this is the way. This is the strategy right here. So I'm going to outline this. Again, 8 steps. They're in no particular order. I would love to hear if you guys have more insight, different information, a different perspective. Let's do that civilly. Let's have these conversations. I realize I'm not the end-all, save-all when it comes to information about how to be a better patriarch and a leader of your family and your community. But I feel like I've got it outlined pretty well here, but I'm certainly interested and open to what you have to share, because a lot of you guys come with different expertise and different backgrounds and different circumstances and scenarios that you've actually seen, and that gives us some edges. It makes us more well-rounded. So let's keep those conversations alive on the socials: YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, wherever you're doing the social media thing. All right, here we go. Number 1, and this is my background. Guys, we've got to get our finances in order. All right, if there is any sort of civil unrest, if we see violence like this, it's safe to say that some of the supply chains are going to be cut off. I mean, you guys saw what happened with toilet paper, for example, right? Or access to food. I remember several months ago going into the grocery store and just not seeing any food there. But you've got to have your financial house in order. There's also a weakening of the U.S. dollar. Every time we have things like this, we print a bunch of money, we infuse more money into the hands of our citizens. And what does that do? Well, it devalues the dollar. And if the value of the dollar is dropped, then we have inflation, right? And so if you're not in a financial position to deal with that inflation, meaning you don't have wealth and it's not being built up, and you don't have assets that are returning investments to you and dividends and all these types of things, you're actually gonna be on the downside of that, right? Because you don't have the money to keep up with the inflation in order to buy the goods and the services and the products that you need to sustain yourself. So you've got to get your financial house in order. And I wrote a couple of subcategories here. Number one, pay off your debt. Guys, you've got to get that debt paid off, because if you're paying $300, $400, $500, $600, $800 on a car payment or a personal loan or a medical bill or student debt, that's going to hurt, because you're paying more than you should and more than you have to. I mean, even if your interest rate is 6, 7, 8%, you're probably going to pay twice as much for that vehicle than had you just paid for it, cash. So how do we mitigate some of that and not pay so much to these financial institutions that are preying upon you? Well, you get that stuff paid off. And in the meantime, don't make any large purchases that you can't finance on your own. Don't go to the bank and ask for money. If you can't pay for it on your own, then I think specifically with the volatility in the market and the volatility in culture and society in general, that you probably ought to just refrain from making that purchase for now. There may be a reason or an opportunity down the road, but I would strongly consider not doing that currently. Also, having cash on hand. We've been pulling out a little cash periodically and just having that cash on hand. We've been diversifying our portfolio into real and tangible assets, and also into commodities, your precious metals, gold, silver, things like that. I don't think that's, again, the end-all, save-all that people think it is, but it certainly is a hedge against this inflation that we're likely going to see as the value of the dollar continues to decline and plummet. So build your wealth, be prudent with your financial decisions, pay off your debt as quickly and efficiently and effectively as possible. If you want to know how to do that, I think Dave Ramsey's got some great stuff on paying off your debt. I don't agree with everything he's got going on, but certainly with paying off debt. And live a little bit more frugally over the next 6 months to 12 months so that you can take care of this stuff. It's very, very important that you do. And please get a notepad out. This is the roadmap right here. So get a notepad out and ask yourself where you fall within each of these categories. Sit down with your wife, talk with her about it, talk with your children about what you're doing, and measure yourself, grade yourself. We're getting back into school, so give yourself a report card on this, a grade. And if you're anything below a B, I would say you probably ought to continue to shore that up and work on these things so you can get straight A's across the board on these 8 points. So number one, financial house in order. Number two, guys, you got to get physically strong. All right, I've talked about it before. I think you can be a good man and not be at the pinnacle of your physical prowess. I think that you can be overweight and still be virtuous. I think you can be a kind person. I think you can be a good person. But if you're out of shape, overweight, weak, the reality is that you cannot be as good at being a man. And David Gilmour talks about this distinction. Jack Donovan reaches deep into this distinction of the difference between a good man and being good at being a man. The reality is that if you're overweight, you're weak, and you're not in physical condition, then you just don't have the strength, you don't have the stamina, you don't have the energy, and you don't have the physical capacity to deal with some of the threats that you may deal with. Whether that's a violent encounter, whether that's a natural disaster, some other type of emergency or situation that you need to deal with. Man, maybe even, you get in a car wreck and you need to lift a car hood off of your wife, or we've got this intersection just outside of our house, and I swear there's at least 2 crashes at this intersection every single month. And fortunately, nothing's been serious at this point, and everybody's walked away just fine with some minor cuts and bruises and scrapes and a little bit of shock. But, if there's something catastrophic out here, I want to be able to make sure that I do my part as a citizen of this community to help out where I can. And if I'm physically strong, I'm going to be capable of doing that. But if I'm not physically strong, and I come up with all the excuses in the world as to why I can't take care of myself, my body, then I won't be putting myself in the position of being that patriarch that I talked about earlier. So guys, get strong, work out every single day, consume the right foods, drop the alcohol, all the things that you need to be doing. I'm not telling you anything you haven't heard before. So again, write this down in your notepad and grade yourself. Are you an A? Are you a C? Are you a D? Are you an F? Like, be honest. Be honest with yourself. Because if you're an F or a D right now, you know you need to improve it. But if you fool yourself or attempt to trick yourself into saying, yeah, I'm a B, okay, well, then you're not going to do anything about it. So it might not be comfortable to realize and come to the conclusion that you're fat, that you're obese, that you're unhealthy. But I would think that now's a pretty good time to get honest about this and start to improve. And not to mention, I mean, look at the wake of COVID-19. If you have some sort of a medical condition or an illness, your likelihood of getting into a hospital has been diminished. Certainly, I'm not even interested in going into a medical practitioner or a hospital at this time or any other time, because then you subject yourselves to other potential illnesses. You subject yourselves to, obviously, the cost associated with medical procedures and staying healthy that way. It's not good. It's not good. And it diminishes your sovereignty, and it diminishes your opportunity to lead your family and the people that you love. So keep yourselves healthy. Lean out, lose weight, exercise, get strong, get the right amount of sleep, limit the amount of unnecessary stress on your body. Some stress is good. There's good stress and there's bad stress. You don't want that unnecessary stress. And by following, for example, point number 1 with the finances, that's going to help your physical health, by the way, because you're not going to be so stressed out about how you're going to make the mortgage payment because you got everything in order. So number 1, finances. Number 2, get strong, get fit, and take care of your body. And encourage your family to do the same, by the way. All right, number 3, provisions. Guys, right now you need to be stocking up on provisions. I talked about it earlier. We ran into a situation where there's no toilet paper for months there, which was a crazy and wild thing. I told you I went into grocery stores. I'm sure you guys had similar experiences where provisions weren't as readily available. Several months ago, I would jump on Amazon to buy certain items, and if they weren't considered a necessity by the powers that be, I don't know who even determined that, then I wasn't able to get those things for like 2 to 3, 4 weeks, where usually I'm typically used to getting it in 24 hours, 48 hours. So if things go south, you need to make sure you have provisions on hand. You need to have food storage. You need to have ammunition. You need to have blankets. You need to have fuel and clothing. Like, these are all things that might be limited if it hits the fan. And I don't want you to be in that position and find yourself wanting because you didn't heed the advice that not only I've shared, but that people have been sharing for, hundreds of years. And you overlooked it because you thought, oh, nothing bad can happen. Well, if 2020 hasn't taught us anything, I don't know where you've been. Like, obviously, things can come up that we never would have anticipated. So build up your food storage. Build up your blankets. Build up get batteries, get radios, get firearms, get ammunition. Build up all the fuel, water, all the provisions that you may need should you be without. We're coming into winter in Maine. Last year, fortunately, was a relatively mild winter. The power did go out towards the end of the season, and it was out for almost 4 days. I mean, I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. And it wasn't catastrophic, and we weren't in any real danger because we had neighbors and people that could help if needed. But we had the provisions to make sure that, we were taken care of. So no power for 4 days. And things were fine. We had the generator in place, we had the fuel that we needed, and everything was fine. But if we hadn't prepared, it may not have been fine. We would have been really, really cold. We would have probably had to go somewhere else because we couldn't keep the house warm enough for us to survive. So this stuff's important. So make sure you build up the provisions. That's number 3. Number 4, training. Guys, you got to get training in. You got to make your body a weapon. So martial arts, jiu-jitsu, boxing, wrestling, Muay Thai, I don't care what it is. Learn to harness the weapons that you have, because you may find yourself in an altercation, a life and death altercation. We're actually seeing that. We've seen 2 situations over the past, 5-6 days, where it's literally been a life and death encounter and a life and death situation. So you need to get the training in place. And also, in addition to making your body a weapon, you need to get firearms training. Every American should own a firearm and should be properly trained with that firearm. Now, I know a lot of you guys listening are fully on board with that. And I know that there's probably some of you who are listening who are like, I don't need a gun. I don't want a gun. Well, look, there might be a point in your life in the not too distant future, because of my predictions earlier, where having a firearm on you and you being able to utilize that weapon effectively will quite literally save your life. I realize if you've never been exposed to firearms that they can be scary. There's a lot of uncertainty and doubt and smells and noises, and it feels weird. I get all that. I get all that. Okay, I grew up not around firearms, and it wasn't until I moved to Utah when I was 14, 15 years old that I really became exposed to firearms. And there was a lot of doubt and fear in that until I learned how to handle a firearm and shoot it properly and defend myself. If you want a great resource on this, I would check out Warrior Poet Society, and specifically Warrior Poet Society Network, which I'm actually part of. I have an exclusive show over there, so I'm sharing content that you wouldn't get here on the podcast. But John Lovell does some great information on firearms training, both rifles and pistols. There's another gentleman there who, his name escapes me right now. He does a lot with knife work and close quarter combat, so that would be another avenue to explore. And then also Tony Sentmanat, Real World Tactical, obviously deals with the physical component of it and the tactical side of it. He was on the podcast years and years ago, but if I remember correctly, former SWAT officer, and I believe also, don't quote me on this, I believe he was in the Marine Corps for a while as well. Very interesting guys, very knowledgeable men. And if you take those courses and go through those programs on the Warrior Poet Society Network, you're going to be more equipped to deal with a violent encounter. And if you don't deal with a violent encounter and you have all this training, congratulations. It's better to have the training and not need it than to need it and not have it. Right? It's that old adage of better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. This is what I want you to become. And by the way, I think training yourself in some sort of martial arts and also training with firearms and other weapons is going to make you a better human being. And you'll have more respect for life. You'll have more respect for violent encounters. And I think you'll just be a more well-rounded person, even if you don't have to actually use your training, which would be a good thing. That's what we want. We don't want to have to use it, but we want it available should we need to. All right, number 5. Let me recap real quick. So number 1, finances. Number 2 is your physical health. Number 3 is building up your provisions. Number 4 is training. And then number 5 is fortifying your positions. You've got to fortify your positions. You've got your home. You've got your castle. This is where you're probably going to make a stand, or maybe you're going to be in your vehicle. I mean, we've seen that where people have quite literally been ripped out of their vehicles and beaten nearly to death. So if your position isn't fortified, well, you're just exposing yourself to unnecessary risk. So when it comes to your home, do you have security systems in place? Do you have a dog? Does everybody know how to behave and how to act? Are all the doors locked, and are all the points of entry secured? Are there plans in place, not just for violent encounters, but natural disasters or a fire or a power outage like I talked about earlier? This is your space. It reminds me in a funny way of, Home Alone. I think if I remember right, Kevin McAllister says, "This is my home. I have to defend it." Well, this is your castle. This is your space. You own this. This is yours. So protect it, fortify it, make it a bunker that is impenetrable, and make sure that your family and the people that you love are safe within the walls of your home. Again, lighting, security systems, little tactics that you can do to give yourself a little bit more time if you had some intruder come into place. Dogs are another layer to this. I talked about layers in a podcast several months ago. Just because you have a dog doesn't mean you're protected. Just because you have a firearm in your house doesn't mean that you'll be able to ward off a intruder. Just because you have a security system doesn't mean that somebody won't be able to breach that security system. Okay, so you need to have depth and layers to fortifying your position. Think about it in your vehicle as well. Do you have a firearm in your vehicle? Are you able to defend yourself? Can you stay out of trouble? One thing I think about a lot is when I see cars pull up right behind other vehicles. Like, why would anybody ever do that? I think they do it because they don't think about it, but you need to give yourself space. Because if you're right bumper to bumper with a car in front of you and you need to get out of that situation, you're not going to be able to. But if you give yourself some distance and space, if something happens, you've got plenty of time and space to maneuver where you need to maneuver. So start thinking about these scenarios. What would happen if? And then play that scenario out, and then build in the provision and the contingency to be able to keep you and your loved ones safe in those encounters. I know I'm really not getting deep into these things. I'm kind of covering it from a 30,000 foot view, but these are all things to consider. And then you, again, can grade yourself, give yourself the report card. And if you're like, yeah, I really need to shore up my training, then, we can seek out additional training and I can give you some additional resources. But I'm trying to give you the overview now. You look at it, you determine specifically what you need to improve upon. Because some of you guys are pretty good in all of these areas. Some of you guys are pretty good in a few of these areas. And some of you guys don't have any of this stuff figured out. I'm probably pretty good in like 80% of these. Even as I go through this, there's things that I can improve, and I will improve. So again, number 5, fortify your position. Number 6, we've got 3 more. Number 6 is work on your skill sets. And when I'm talking about skill sets, I'm talking about things that are applicable, things that are practical, things that you're going to be able to use, that you can be able to sell, maybe services or products or information. I think about my wife with gardening. That's a skill set that might actually come in handy. We had dinner just last night. My wife made BLTs, and we had green beans. She grew the tomatoes out of the garden. She grew the green beans, obviously, and so we have a little bit of dependency there. Independence there. We're not dependent on outside factors. We have this stuff built in. She's also doing beekeeping, so we've got that as a provision. There's things that we've built into place as far as our skill sets go. The skill sets that I'm developing, even as I'm running this organization and this business, are helping me to be able to earn income, which plays into point number 1, finances. And now I'm location independent, right? I don't need to be bogged down in a big city where I'm not safe and we're not comfortable. I can go wherever I need to go, but still be able to provide revenue and income to our family because of the skill sets that I've developed. If you have found yourself in a physical job, you go to an office, a 9 to 5, something like that, okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but consider what might happen. You might get stuck in a city. There might be a fire. You might run into a riot. How do you defend yourself against that? Of course, you do all these things that we talked about, but you can also develop an online business, right, on the side. And maybe at some point, like we've been able to do with Order of Man, that will entirely replace you having to leave your house and go into the city or go somewhere where it's not safe. So again, it's all about this idea of sovereignty, making yourself sovereign, that you have direct control and authority over how you spend your time, your energy, and your resources. So what skill sets, as you're writing this out, what skill sets do you need to develop in order to shore up your finances, in order to keep yourself safe, in order to build up the provisions that you need when it comes to food and other things? Can you sew clothes? Can you make blankets? Can you do basic repairs around the house? Some of this stuff's going to come in handy, so you better be aware of it. All right, number 7, having emergency plans in place. Guys, you got to have these emergency plans in place. All right, because if they're not in place, then nobody's going to know what to do. And even though you might make the right call in that scenario, that's a big might. Not everybody will make the same call. And there's differences of opinion, and there's different ideas, and there's different perspectives. And like if I haven't talked with my kids about how to deal with a fire in the house, I might do the right thing, my wife might do the right thing, and my kids might die because I didn't communicate effectively with them what they should do in these situations. If there's an intruder, okay, if there's a power outage, or if I'm in somewhere else and I'm not here, does my wife have the combo to the safe? Is there a plan in place? What are they going to do? How am I going to get home if I'm not close and roads are closed, or there's something that is preventing me from getting back to my family? Do you have the bug out bag? Do you have the bug in bag? Do you have the routes figured out? How well do you know your area? I mean, I drive around literally every single day, and I look for new back roads, new streets, new ways to get to different places in my immediate area that I've never driven before. And about, I would say 60 to 70% of the time, I find a little different route, a little different pull-off that I wasn't aware of. And I'm doing that deliberately and intentionally because I want to know these roads, and I want to know the woods, and I want to know exactly where I am relative to other points in the area. This is my job. And it doesn't take a lot if you build this up over time. And look, as nasty as things are getting right now, they are going to get worse. But we've got some time. So don't squander it and think, oh yeah, I've got 30 days, I've got 60 days, I've got 90 days, I've got a year. Oh, that won't ever happen. We don't know if it'll happen. So start preparing yourself now. And even if you just get 1% better in each of these areas every single day, you get 30, 60, 90 days out, man, you're starting to look pretty good and pretty protected. So work those emergency plans and think about all these scenarios. That's one of the reoccurring themes in today's discussion. So think about and play out all these scenarios and how would you be jeopardized? How would you be compromised? Where are your vulnerabilities and your weaknesses? Because that's what people will exploit, by the way. They're going to look for the weaknesses. And if you have 90% good on all these things, that 10% is going to be exploited. Nature's going to do it. Nature's going to find a way to exploit it, or people are going to find a way to exploit it to get what you have or to make your life hell and miserable. So don't let there be weaknesses. Find them, seek them out, play out the scenario, and then shore up that weakness. The last one here, guys, I think this one's a little different maybe than you've heard in the past. And maybe some of you have heard things like this, but the last point I wanted to make, and again, these are in no particular order, is to build a network. You got to build a network. I think a lot of guys cover the first 7 areas I talked about pretty well, but then they don't have a network in their community. They aren't networked. They aren't connected. They don't know people. They don't know their neighbors. They don't have other people who are valuable, who have some of these skill sets in place, who have provisions. We've got that, but we've spent the last year and 2 or 3 months at this point building up our network, building up our friendships, getting to know people, communicating with law enforcement in the area, first responders. We have relationships with these individuals by design. By design, we want to know these people. Because if something goes south and we want to be able to be connected with these individuals, I've got a neighbor who's probably one of the best people to know because he knows how to do everything. And we're friends by design because he's been a good friend. He's been helpful to my family. We've gotten to know each other. My kids play with their kids, and he's a good person to know. Do you know the people in your area? And if you don't, now's probably the time to start doing that because people look after the people they like and they know and they trust. And if you don't know your neighbor, it's less likely that you're going to look after them and also less likely they're going to look after you. But if you know your neighbors, you have connections with these individuals, you eat and break food, break bread together, it's more likely that you're going to be able to tap into that network should you need to. And they can tap into you should they need to. This is reciprocal. You don't have these relationships just so you can get something when you need it, but that you can provide as well. We always offer and provide more than we consume. But guys, if you're not building a network, get to know the people in your area, start with your neighbors, figure out where your coworkers live, find friends, go to the gym. These things all tie together so that you have networks and people everywhere you go. I think about the movies, I have like Jason Bourne and he goes overseas and he has this this connection in London, right? Because he's anywhere, or it's somewhere in South America he goes and he's got another connection there. That's what you want. Anywhere you go, you should be connected to somebody who you could rely upon and they could rely upon you. It's going to make you more safe. It's going to make you better protected, and it's going to expand your capabilities in keeping yourself and others alive. Guys, we live in interesting times. Interesting is mild. We live in dangerous times as well. And as I predicted earlier in the podcast, I fear it's only going to get worse. But I use that fear. Like I don't let that fear paralyze me. And I think a lot of people do, right? So I don't want to think about it. I'm afraid, or I wonder what'll happen, so I'm not going to think about it. Well, that's paralyzing you. The fear is there for a reason. It's there to serve you. It's there to help you. It's there to point out vulnerabilities and weaknesses so that you can do something about it. So guys, over the next 90 days, maybe a little less at this point, might be closer to 60 at this point, I want you to start working on this stuff. Give yourself, list all these out. Again, finances, health, your provisions, your training, fortifying your positions, developing your skill sets, having emergency plans, and then building out a network. You got 60 days before I think things really start to get nasty and miserable. Not just in the big cities. It's going to start going into the suburbs. It's going to spread like a virus. It's going to get into the suburbs. It's going to get into more of these rural areas, and you need to be prepared. Your family's relying upon you. Your neighbors and your community members are relying upon you. Don't find yourself wanting in that time. This is the moment where we really determine if we've done all that we can as men and what kind of men we are. And I want you to be able to pass that test. Not only because that's what we're called to do, but because people will be relying upon it. Life and death scenarios. All right? Get it done, guys. Let me know on your report card. Give yourself a grade and let me know. Just hit me up I'm most active on Instagram, so do it there. I'll make a post about this and list out these eight strategies or tactics, factors, whatever you want to call them. And you can let me know where you stand and what you plan on doing to shore these areas up. All right, guys, we got a lot of work to do. 60 days, roughly, to get this done and get this taken care of before things get nasty. And even if they don't get nasty, good. You're more prepared. You're better off. And so are the people you care about. All right, guys. We'll be back next week for another interview on Tuesday. But until then, go out there, get these things in place, take action, and become the man you are meant to be.